Lla gazed out of the window of her suburban home, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands. The manicured lawn and picket fence painted a picture of domestic bliss, but inside a storm was brewing. She sighed, her reflection in the glass a stark reminder of the woman she had become, successful, married and utterly unfulfilled. The sound of Brooks shuffling down the stairs broke her reverie. "Morning, honey," he called out, his voice warm. Lla, who was already familiar with this routine, plastered a smile on her face as she turned to face her husband. "Good morning," she replied, watching him pour his own coffee. His devotion was evident in every move he made, from the way he doctored her coffee just the way she liked it to the soft kiss he placed on her cheek. "It's a big day at work," Brooks said, settling into a kitchen chair. Lla nodded, feeling guilty. "Yeah, busy as always," she replied, her guilt gnawing at her insides. "You know how it is. It's all good. Don't let Grayson work you too hard," Brooks said with a laugh. "But I suppose that's why he's the boss." At the mention of Grayson's name, Lila's heart rate quickened. She forced a laugh, but it felt hollow to her own ears. On her way to work, Lila's mind wandered to Grayson. Their affair had started innocently enough. Late nights at the office, sharing confidences over takeout dinners. But it had quickly spiraled into something more. Something dangerous and thrilling that made her feel alive in ways her marriage never had. They shared office confidences over takeout dinners, but it had quickly spiraled into something more. Something dangerous and thrilling that made her feel alive in ways her marriage never had. Pulling into the parking lot, Lla checked her reflection in the rearview mirror. No trace of guilt, no hint of a secret she carried. She was perfect. She grabbed her briefcase and strode towards the office building, her heels clicking against the pavement. Lla stepped out of the elevator onto her floor. The familiar buzz of phones and keyboards filled the air, but something fell off as heads turned as she walked past. Whispers followed in her wake, and unease prickled at the back of her neck as she approached her desk. Then she saw it, a massive sign hung above her workspace, the word "cheater going to cheat" blazoned in bold red letters beneath. It was a poster-size photo of her and Grayson in an intimate embrace. The world tilted on its axis. Lila's briefcase slipped from her grasp and hit the floor with a dull thud. Her colleagues' whispers grew louder. There was a cacophony of judgment and disgust. "Oh my God," someone muttered. "I always knew there was something going on between them." Another voice added, Lila's throat constricted, her lungs burning as she struggled. This couldn't be happening. It was a nightmare. She pinched herself hard, but the scene didn't change. A hand landed on her shoulder, and she turned around to find Grayson standing there, his face ashen. She shook off his touch, unable to bear it without a word. She turned and ran, ignoring the call of her name behind her. The elevator was too slow, so she took the stairs two at a time. She rushed out of the building, needing to get to her car to get away from the sunny day. She unlocked the door and got in, sitting there gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, with shaking hands, she started the engine and drove off. She needed to get home to explain everything to Brooks before he found out some other way. The drive was a blur, with traffic lights and stop signs barely registering as she sped through the suburbs. Finally, she screeched to a halt in front of their house, but something was wrong. The curtains were drawn, and Brooks's car was missing from the driveway. Heart pounding, Lla rushed to the front door. Her key wouldn't turn in the lock. She tried to unlock the door again and again, but it was useless. The locks had been changed. She looked through the window and saw that the house was empty. Where were the photos on the mantelpiece and the throw pillows she had arranged on the couch? She called out, "Brooks?" and pounded on the door. There was silence. She was starting to panic. She reached for her phone and dialed Brooks's number. She was hoping he'd pick up, but she got an automated message saying the number was disconnected. Lla sank to her knees on the front porch, feeling the reality of her situation hit her. In the span of an hour, she'd lost everything, her job, her home, and her husband. She'd done it for a cheap thrill with her boss. Lla realized the gravity of her actions. She had nowhere left to turn except her mother. With trembling fingers, she dialed the familiar number. "Mom," she said when Darla picked up. Her voice was cracking. "I need help. Can I come over?" There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When Darla spoke, her voice was cold and clipped. "I suppose you'd better." The drive to her childhood home was interminable. Lila's mind was racing, trying to piece together how everything it all fell apart so quickly. Who had taken that photo? How long had Brooks known? Lila couldn't stop thinking about it as she pulled into her mother's driveway. She saw Darla standing on the porch, arms crossed. There was no warmth in her expression, no motherly concern. Just disappointment and something that looked like disgust. Lila climbed out of the car, feeling shaky. "Legs, Mom," Darla said, holding up a hand to cut her off. She turned and went into the house, leaving the door open behind her. Lila followed, feeling like a child rather than a grown woman in the living room. A large cardboard box sat on the coffee table. Darla gestured to it. "This came for you earlier from Brooks," she said. Lila's stomach dropped with trembling hands as she lifted the lid of the box and saw inside. Photographs stared up at her, each one a piece of damning evidence. She and Grayson were in restaurants and hotel rooms, stealing kisses in dark corners of the office, and every secret moment was laid bare. "Oh God," Lila whispered, sinking onto the couch. She rifled through the photos, horror growing with each image. How long had Brooks been watching her? How much did he know? At the bottom of the box, she found a letter from Brooks. The words were written in a hand she recognized. They cut deeper than any knife. "Lila, I hope you're happy. I hope whatever thrill you got from your boss was worth throwing away our marriage and our life together. I've known about your affair for months. Every lie, every late night at the office, every business trip. I knew it all and now so does everyone else. I've sent copies of these photos to our families and friends, and to your colleagues. Everyone knows what kind of person you really are now, workers. I hope it was worth it. Don't bother trying to come home. I've changed the locks and removed all your things. You'll find divorce papers in this box, sign them and leave them with your mother. I never want to see you again. Goodbye, Lila. I hope he was worth it, Brooks." The letter fell from Lila's numb fingers. She looked up at her mother, desperate for some shred of Darla's face was a mask of disappointment and anger. "How could you do this?" Lila opened her mouth to respond but no words came out. What could she say? How could she possibly justify her actions? She began, but Darla cut her off. "No, I don't want to hear your excuses. You can stay here. I don't condone what you've done. Your old room is still set up. I suggest you go there and think long and hard about the choices you've made." Dara turned and left the room, leaving Lila alone with the evidence of her betrayal scattered around her. Lila sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the photos and reading and rereading Brooks's letter. She was facing the full weight of her actions. She was overwhelmed by guilt and regret. She'd lost everything, her husband, her job, her friends, her reputation. All gone in the blink of an eye. And for what? A few stolen moments with Grayson. The thrill of sneaking around at night. Finally, Lila dragged herself up to her childhood bedroom. It was exactly as she'd left it years ago. A time capsule of a simpler, more innocent time. She collapsed on one of the she was lying in bed, clutching one of the photos that had caused so much trouble for her. In the quiet darkness, she realized that her new life was going to be very different from what she had expected. She was alone, and her deepest secrets were laid bare for all to see. She was the only person to blame for this situation. Tears were streaming down her face as she realized that this was only the beginning. She had no idea how she would face the real consequences of her actions. The harsh morning light filtering through the thin curtains of Lila's childhood bedroom roused her from a fitful sleep. For a blissful moment she forgot where she was and why. Then reality crashed down heavily on her chest. Lila dragged herself out of bed, her reflection in the old vanity mirror a stark reminder of how far she'd fallen. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, her hair a tangled mess. She looked as broken on the outside as she felt on the inside. As she fell, she heard voices downstairs. Her mother's voice was sharp, and there was a deeper male voice she didn't recognize. She crept to the top of the stairs and strained to hear. She couldn't believe her father would do something like this. Darla said they'd raised her better than that. People make mistakes. It took Lla a moment to recognize her father's voice, but what did Brooke say? Darla said it was cruel to expose her like that to everyone. After what he did to him, he has every right to be angry. I'm not saying he doesn't, but this public humiliation is wrong. Lila's heart clenched even though her father, who'd always been her staunchest defender, couldn't fully support her now. Well, she made her bed, Darla said firmly. Now she has to lie in it. Lla went to her room, unable to bear it any longer. She grabbed her phone, hesitating before turning it on. As soon as the screen lit up, it exploded with notifications, missed calls, text messages, emails, all demanding explanations. She couldn't give one name that stood out among the rest. Grayson was the only one she could think of. She opened his message, "We need to talk. Meet me at the office at 9 o'clock. Lila checked the clock, 8, if she left now, she'd make it just in time, but did she even want to see Grayson? What could he possibly say to make this better in the end? Curiosity got the better of her. Lila got ready quickly, trying to make herself look as presentable as possible. She crept down the stairs, praying she could slip out unnoticed. No such luck. Darla's voice rang out just as Lila reached for the door handle. "Do you think you're going to be able to sort this out, Lila?" Darla asked, her eyes narrowing as she looked at her daughter. "I have to go to the office to talk to Grayson," Lila replied, turning to face her mother's disapproving glare. "I don't think you've done enough damage already, Mom," Lila pleaded. "I really need to sort this out, sir. Your marriage is over, your reputation is in tatters. What exactly do you think you're going to accomplish?" Darla snapped. Lila felt her temper flare. "I don't know. Okay, but I can't just sit here and do nothing. You should have thought of that before you started sleeping with your boss," Darla retorted. The words stung, but Lila couldn't argue. She was right. Instead, she turned and walked out, ignoring her mother's calls. The drive to the office was tense. Every passing car felt like a potential judge. Had they seen? Lila had seen the photos and her paranoia grew with each mile as she pulled into the parking lot. Her stomach was churning and the building loomed before her. It was no longer a place of ambition and success, but a monument to her mistakes. Grayson was waiting in the lobby. He had his usual confident demeanor replaced by nervous energy when he saw Lila. He was relieved she had come. He said, "Thank God you came." He ushered her into the office. "We need to talk. Let's go to his office." Grayson closed the door and turned to Lila. They didn't say anything. The weight of their actions hung heavy between them. Finally, Lila broke the silence. "What are we going to do?" Lila felt like the floor had dropped out from under her, as if she was standing on a tightrope. "Both of us, but you're the CEO and I slept with a married employee." Grayson snapped, "It doesn't exactly look good for the company, so what?" "So that's it?" Lila asked, her anger rising. "We just lose everything." Grayson stopped pacing and fixed her with a hard stare. "What did you expect? That we'd run off into the sunset together? This was never going to." His words hit her like a slap. "I thought you'd leave your wife and kids." Grayson shook his head. This was Fonda, but it was never going to be more than that. Lila felt her world tilt again. "So, all those things you said about us having a future together. I said what I needed to say to keep you interested." Grayson admitted not meeting her eyes. "I'm sorry if you." She realized she'd made a mistake. She'd thrown away everything, her marriage, her career, her reputation, for a man who saw her as nothing more than a fun distraction. She whispered, "You bastard." At least Grayson had the decency to look ashamed. "I'm sorry, Lila," But we need to think about damage control now. The board wants to see us both at 2 p.m. We need to show we're on the same page. Lla laughed bitterly. Showing we're on the same page. You used me, Grayson. You lied to me and now you want me to help save your ass. We're both in this mess. Don't do anything rash. She pulled her arm away, like, sleep with my married boss. Too late for that, she stormed out of the office, ignoring Grayson's calls behind her in the elevator. She let the tears fall freely. Everything she believed about their relationship had been a lie. She'd sacrificed it all for a man who saw her as nothing more than a convenient fling. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Thought you might want to see this. Your boyfriend isn't as smooth as he thinks. She opened the attachment, which was a video link. Lla pressed play. It was security camera footage from Grayson's office. Timed just minutes after she'd left, it showed Grayson on the phone. His face was a mask of concern. Baby, I promise it's over, he said. You saw the photos. I ended it. No, I don't have feelings for her. It was just sex. I know. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you. I love you too. See you tonight. Lla felt sick even now. Grayson was lying and manipulating everyone around him. She'd fallen for a hook, line and sinker. She drove home in a day's drive, her mind reeling. When she arrived, she found her father waiting on the porch. On the porch, he said, "Hey kiddo." She approached, feeling like it had been a rough day. The simple question broke something in Lla. She collapsed into her father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. I've ruined everything, Dad, she choked between sobs. My marriage, my job, my life, it's all gone. He held her tightly, stroking her hair like he had when she was a little girl. It's okay. We'll figure this out. Lla asked, pulling back to look at him. How can I possibly fix this? Her father's eyes were sad but kind. I don't know if you can fix it, sweetheart, but you can learn from it and grow from it. Lla wiped her eyes, sniffling. I don't even know where to start. Well, first things first, her father said, leading her inside. You need to face what you've done. All of it. In the living room. The box. There were still photos on the coffee table, and Lla felt sick. I can't, she whispered. It's too much. Her father's voice was gentle but firm. You have to understand what happened. That's the only way you can move forward with trembling hands. Lla opened the box and forced herself to look at each photo. Each piece of evidence of her betrayal. There were dozens of photos, spanning months, of her betraying him. They were stolen kisses in dark corners of the office, intimate moments in hotel rooms, and even a few shots of them entering Grayson's house when his wife was out of town. Lla couldn't believe what she was seeing. How could she have been so stupid? Her father sat beside her, a silent comfort as Lla went through the box, opening up to him and telling him everything. She told him how the affair started, how it escalated, and how she convinced herself it was more than just a fling. She said, I really thought he loved me. Her voice was small. She said, I thought we had a future together. Her father sighed heavily. He said, love doesn't ask you to betray your vows. It doesn't make you lie and sneak around. You felt it wasn't love, it was infatuation, maybe lust, certainly not love. The words stung, but Lla knew he was right. She'd mistaken passion for love and thrown away a good man and a good life for the thrill of forbidden romance. As they reached the bottom of the box, Lla found something she hadn't noticed before, a USB drive. She plugged it into her laptop and saw. She was shocked to see audio recordings taken from microphones in Grayson's office. She heard herself and Grayson planning their meeting, making excuses to their spouses, and bad-mouthing Brooks. She also heard herself complaining about his workaholic tendencies and lack of spontaneity. But the worst part was that Brooks had somehow gotten footage of her and Grayson together, intimate moments she thought had been private. Lla felt sick, realizing how thoroughly she had been watched and how completely her betrayal had been documented. She whispered, "I can't believe Brooks did all this." Her father's voice was grim. Can you blame him? He suspected something was wrong. He needed proof, but to go to these lengths. Lla trailed off, unable to finish the thought. He was hurt, Lla, her father said softly. Betrayed by the woman he loved. People do extreme things when they're in pain. The truth of his words hit Lla like a physical blow. She caused this. All of it. Her selfish actions had driven Brooks to these extremes. As the full weight of her actions settled over her, Lla felt something inside her break. She curled into herself, sobbing. Her father held her, offering what comfort he could. When she could finally speak again, Lla asked, "What do I do now?" Her father's voice was gentle but firm. "You start by accepting responsibility. No more excuses or justifications. You did this, Lla. You need to own it." Lla nodded, wiping her eyes. "Then you start rebuilding. It won't be easy. Your life as you knew it is over, but that doesn't mean you can't build a new one." As they sat there surrounded by the evidence of her mistakes, Lla felt a strange sense of calm settle over her. The worst that happened was that her secrets were out and her life in shambles, but she was still here, still breathing, still capable of change. She said softly, "I want to be better." She needed to be better than her father. He gave her hand a squeeze. "That's a good start, kiddo. That's a very good start." As night fell, Lla retreated to her room. She was emotionally and physically exhausted. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was racing with everything she'd learned. Her phone buzzed. Another text from the unknown number. "Board meeting didn't go well for your boyfriend? It seems like he's about to get a taste of his own medicine. I thought you'd want to know. I've attached a link to a breaking news story. I'm sending it with a sense of morbid curiosity. It says that the CEO of Breaking Tech, Grayson Mills, has resigned." The article goes on to say that he was forced to resign after the board received anonymous evidence of multiple affairs with employees. His wife is filing for divorce and there are whispers of potential lawsuits from other women. Lla felt a mix of emotions. Anger at Grayson's betrayal made her feel grim satisfaction at his downfall and an overwhelming sense of shame at her own part in the mess as she lay there processing everything. A new text came through, this one from Brooks. "I hope you're happy. I hope it was worth it." Lla stared at the message, tears welling in her eyes. She started to type a response and apology, but then stopped. What could she possibly say to make this better? In the end, she simply replied, "It." She knew it wasn't enough. Nothing would ever undo the damage she caused, but it was a start. She'd taken a small step towards owning her mistakes and facing the consequences of her actions as she drifted off to sleep. She'd made a promise to herself, she couldn't change the past, but she could learn from it. She could be better. She had to be better. Tomorrow would be the first day of her new life. She'd build it on honesty, integrity, and hard work. The lesson she'd learned was that it wouldn't be easy, but it was necessary. The road ahead was long and uncertain, but for the first time in months, Lla felt a glimmer of hope. She'd hit rock bottom, but the only way from here was up. The harsh buzz of Lila's alarm clock jolted her awake for a moment. She lay there disoriented before the memories of the past few days came crashing back with a groan. She reached for her phone, dreading what new horrors the day might bring. The screen lit up, and Lila's heart sank as dozens of notifications flooded in. There were missed calls, text messages, and worst of all, social media alerts. With trembling fingers, she opened the first one. Her breath caught in her throat. There, plastered across her Facebook wall, were the photos. The same damning images that Brooke had collected and now displayed for the world to see. Comments poured in, each one was a dagger to her heart. "How could you do this to Brooks? Home wrecker. You should be ashamed of yourself." Lla was flooded with a torrent of hate and judgment. Her vision blurred with tears. It wasn't just Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or even her LinkedIn. All of them were flooded with evidence of her infidelity. A knock at the door startled her. Her father's voice called, "You might want to come downstairs. There's something you need to see." Lla dragged herself out of bed and made her way downstairs. Her parents were in the living room, looking pretty upset. They were watching the local news, which was breaking news that morning. The anchor was saying that a scandal had erupted in their community. It involved a prominent businessman called Brooks Thompson and his wife, Lla. Lila's knees buckled and she sank onto the couch, unable to tear her eyes from the screen. Sources close to the couple revealed that Mrs. Thompson had been engaged in a month. It seems that Mr. Thompson discovered his wife was having an affair with her boss, the recently ousted CEO Grayson Mills. Rather than keeping it private, he made the evidence public. The screen showed photos, thankfully blurred in the most intimate areas. Lla felt her mother's sharp intake of breath and her father's hand on her shoulder. "Rest your support on her shoulder." We reached out to Mr. Thompson for a comment. The anchor continued, "He provided us with this statement." The screen changed to show Brooks's words. "I believed in the sanctity of our marriage vows. I trusted my wife implicitly to discover her betrayal in this manner. It has been devastating. I chose to, I made this information public because I believe in transparency and accountability. Lla made her choices and now she must face the consequences." As the news segment ended, there was silence in the living room. Lla could feel her parents' eyes on her, but she couldn't bring herself to meet their gaze. Finally, her mother spoke. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" "Recrimination, I don't know, Dad. I was bored. I guess restless Grayson made me feel alive and desired. I knew it was wrong, but I couldn't stop." Now she gestured helplessly at the TV. "Now everything's ruined." Her mother scoffed. "Bored? That's your excuse. You threw away your marriage and your reputation. Margaret," her father warned, "everything was because you were bored." Lila's mother was on a roll, though. She needs to hear this. "Do you have any idea what you've done, not just to yourself but to this family? How am I supposed to show my face at church or the country club? Everyone will be talking." Lla flinched at each word, the truth of them hitting her like physical blows. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry," her mother snapped. "Sorry doesn't fix this," Lla said. "I know," her mother replied. "But it's not enough." Lla could respond. Her phone had a text from her lawyer. "Turn on channel 7 now," it said. With shaking hands, Lla changed the channel. She was disappointed to see Brooks on the screen, looking calm and collected as he addressed the press. "I want to thank everyone for their support during this difficult time," he was saying. His voice was steady. "The past few months have been It's been a bit of a nightmare, but I'm determined to move forward with my life." A reporter called out Mr. Thompson and asked him what made him decide to go public with this information. Brooks's face hardened slightly. "I believe in honesty and accountability. Lla made her choices and now she needs to face the consequences of those. I'm not going to lie or cover up her actions." Another reporter spoke up, "Do you have any message for your wife?" For a moment, something flickered in Brooks's eyes, pain and anger. Lla couldn't quite tell what it was, then it was gone, replaced by steely resolve. "I have nothing to say to Lla. Her actions have spoken loudly. That's enough. I wish her well, but our life together is over." Lla felt each word like a knife to her heart. She'd known that her marriage was over, but hearing Brooks say it so definitively and so publicly made it real in a way it hadn't been before. As the press conference continued, Lila's phone. Her phone buzzed again. It was her boss, or at least her former boss. The message was brief and to the point. Given recent events, they felt it was best to terminate her employment, effective immediately. Please do not attempt to enter the office. Your personal belongings will be shipped to you. Lila stared at the message. In the space of a few days, she'd lost everything, her husband, her job, her reputation. All because of her selfish choices. The day passed in a blur of news alerts, angry messages and tearful conversations. By nightfall, Lla felt hollowed out, empty of everything except regret and shame. That night, she lay in bed, unable to sleep. Her phone buzzed with a final message from an unknown number. "Thought you might want to see this. Your story's gone national." With a sense of morbid curiosity, she clicked the link, her stomach churning as she saw her face plastered across a major news website. The headline read "Cheating Wife Exposed, a Cautionary Tale of Infidelity in the Digital Age." The article was harsh, going into great detail about her affair. It painted her as the villain, a cautionary tale about the consequences of betraying your vows. Brooks, on the other hand, was portrayed as he was the wronged hero, dignified in his pain and righteous in his exposure of her misdeeds. Lla read the article twice, each word searing itself into her brain. This was her legacy, and this was how the world would remember her. Weeks passed, and the media frenzy showed no signs of dying down. She became the recluse, unable to face the judgmental stares and whispered comments that followed her everywhere, spent her days holed up in her childhood bedroom, alternating between frantic job searching and periods of numb despair. One morning, as Lla scrolled through yet another series of job rejections, her father knocked on her door. "Lla, can I come in?" She sighed, closing her laptop. "Sure, Dad," she replied, her tone indicating her lack of enthusiasm. He entered, his face etched with concern. "I think it's time we talked about your next steps, honey. You can't stay here forever," she laughed bitterly. "Why not? It's not like I have anywhere else to go or anyone else to turn to. I'd love the chance to work for you. I even find people whispering and pointing at me when I go to the grocery store." Her father sat on the edge of her bed. His voice was gentle but firm. "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but you can't let this define you forever. You made a mistake, a big one, yes, but still just a mistake. It's time to start rebuilding." Lla felt tears welling up. How could she even begin to fix this? He reached out, taking her hand. "You start small, you take responsibility for your actions. You show people that you're more than just your worst mistake." His words struck a chord with her for weeks. She'd been wallowing in self. It was sad to see her letting the world's judgment get to her like that, but maybe your father was right. Maybe it was time to start fighting back. The next day, Lla did something she hadn't done in weeks. She left the house and went up the stairs, and even though Whispers was still following her, she held her head high and forced herself to meet people's eyes at the local diner. She approached the owner and Martha was an older woman who'd known Lla since she was a child. "Martha," Lla said, her voice shaky but determined, "I was wondering if you might have any job openings." Martha's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed slightly. "Why would you want to work here?" she asked. "It's a bit of a step down from your fancy office job, isn't it?" Lla felt her cheeks burn with shame, but she pressed on. "I know I've made mistakes, Martha. Some pretty big ones, but I'm trying to rebuild my life. I'm willing to do any work you have, whether it's waiting tables, washing dishes, or anything else. I just need a chance." Martha studied her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. "All right, Lla. I'll give you a shot, but I'm warning you, one hint of drama and you're out." Lla nodded. Lla was relieved and happy. She thanked Martha, saying she wouldn't regret this. And so began Lila's new life. The work was hard and different from her previous job. Her feet hurt and her hands grew calloused. She went home smelling of grease and sweat more than once, but things began to change. The whispers and stares gradually died down. People started to see her as more than the woman from the scandal. She started to see her as more than the woman from the scandal. She was the hard-working waitress who always had a kind word and a ready smile. After a few months, Lla moved out of her parents' house and rented a tiny studio apartment above the diner. It was a big change from the luxurious home she'd shared with Brooks, but it was hers. She'd earned it through honest work. One evening, As she was closing up the diner, the bell above the door jingled. She looked up and saw Brooks standing there, looking as handsome and put together as ever. For a moment, they just stared at each other, the air heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Brooks broke the silence. "Hello, Lla." Lla swallowed hard, her heart racing. "Brooks," she replied. "What are you doing here?" he asked, gesturing to the almost empty diner. "Let's talk," she replied, leading him to a booth in the corner. As they sat, an awkward silence fell between them. "You look different," he finally said. "Yeah, well, waiting tables will do that to you," she replied, her expression remaining impassive. "I heard you were working here," he said. "I have," she replied, her tone softening slightly. "I was surprised to hear you ask." There was a hint of defensiveness in your tone. "Did you think I'd run off with Grayson and live happily ever after?" Brooks shook his head. "I knew that would never happen. I just didn't expect to see you trying to rebuild your life here of all places." Lla felt a surge of pride. "I'm not running away. Brooks. This is my home. My mistake. I'm facing it head on for a moment." Something like respect flickered in Brooks's eyes, but it was gone in an instant, replaced by the cool detachment she'd grown used to seeing in the media. "I'm selling the house," he said abruptly. "I thought you should know there's still some of your things there if you want them. You should come get them soon." For letting me know, Brooks stood ready to leave but then hesitated. "Lla, why did you do it? Was I really such a terrible husband?" The question caught her off guard for a moment. Lla was tempted to make excuses to blame Brooks for being distant or workaholic, but she promised herself honesty no matter how painful. "No, Brooks," she said softly. "You were a wonderful husband. I was the one who messed up. I was selfish and foolish, and I threw away the best thing in my life because I was too blind to see what I had. I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change anything, but I am truly, deeply sorry." Brooks's face remained impassive, but Lla saw his hands clenched slightly. "You're right, it doesn't change anything," he said, "but thank you for being honest with me at last." He turned and left, the bell jingling behind him. Lla watched him go, feeling a heavy heart. She'd known her marriage was over, but seeing Brooks and hearing him talk about selling their home made it real in a way it hadn't been before. As she finished closing up the diner, Lila's mind wandered to the future. The road ahead was. It's still a long road ahead, and there are still a lot of unknowns, but for the first time in months, she's starting to feel a glimmer of hope. She's hit rock bottom and lost everything, but she's slowly and painfully rebuilding. She's not the same woman she was before, the successful executive with a perfect life. But maybe, just maybe, she can become someone better, someone stronger, more honest, and more appreciative of the simple things in life. As Lla locked up and headed to her tiny apartment, she made a silent promise to herself. She couldn't change the past or undo the hurt she'd caused, but she could learn from it. She could be better. She had to be better. Tomorrow would be another day of hard work and facing the consequences of her actions, but it would also be another day of growth. She was going to have to work hard to earn back the respect she'd thrown away. The woman who'd started this journey had been selfish, entitled and willing to throw away a good man for a cheap thrill. She was gone, in her place stood someone new, someone still flawed and struggling but determined to be better. That was her goal. She hoped that somehow he'd find happiness again and that she'd find a measure of peace for herself along the way. The road ahead was long and the future uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, Lla felt ready to face it head on, one day at a time, one small step at a time. She would rebuild and maybe just maybe she'd become the kind of person she could be proud to be.